Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's date, April 20th of 2023, and it's almost 10 a.m. in the morning. On the screen you see, I think it was yesterday, I'm a fan of the Young Turks, their shows and material and stuff that they put out. And of course makes me a liberal, definitely, and politically. And anyway, I like their coverage and what have you. And yesterday, I believe it was, whatever the date of this, one day ago, okay. And it's received so far 142,000 views. And it's about officials in the McCurtain County, Oklahoma. I, like a lot of other people, saw this report, saw this information or whatever, and I mean, just absolutely appalling, just unbelievably bad, and just devastating. By the way, I'm 82 years old. I spent 30 years working hospital security, and one hospital that I worked there for, I think 10 years, I believe it was. And I never wanted to be a supervisor there, but I ended up being started on the day shift, and then an opening became available for supervisor on the second shift, and I wanted to stay on the day shift. And the director of security pleaded with me to go to the second shift. And I know I'm going to stay on the day shift. I've got 4 young kids. I want to stay on the day shift, And he tried everything to get me to go to the second shift. By the way, it turns out, he was very racist, very, very racist. I actually sort of liked the guy. But on the other hand, I was appalled by his racism and the fact that I just couldn't understand when I attempted to educate him, by doing, grievances through the Human Resources Department. He just, he was in this other world. I mean, but anyway, he knew how to he knew how to get to me. After he tried everything and I wouldn't go to second shift as a supervisor, then he said, "Oh, Jim," called me into his office. "Oh, Jim, there's problems on the second shift, and I need those to be taken. Those problems need to be taken care of. Could you go over on the second shift as a supervisor, just long enough to take care of these problems, that we have in the department, and then you can come back to the day, to the day shift." And able to solve a problem, able to. He knew how to manipulate me. So I went over and I spent years on the second shift as a supervisor. And anyway, the problem that I went over there for was not racism. He never mentioned that, but racism was a problem in the security department. I ended up eventually going back to, the day shift. And of course, while I was there, during the years that I worked there, I dealt with the racism in our department. I'm not going to go through all the things, like the second shift security officers, and they had a supervisor. When a black security officer was hired for the second shift, he wasn't around very long because they turned in the second shift they'd show him around. They'd be his buddy, They'd show him around. Okay, now here's the doors that you have to unlock at such and such a time, and here's the doors you lock at such and such a time, and then you have to go lock this elevator, all this kind of stuff, They were buddy, And then when they say, okay, now do you think, okay, can you go lock these doors up, the ones we lock at 9 o'clock or whatever? Okay, the guy goes out, he unlocks, whatever he's supposed to do. He comes back and they said, okay, well, I'm not sure exactly, how this would work, but, I'm not sure if they said, well, let's go, well, make sure you got them, or whatever. But what they did is they went around and unlocked them or locked them, whatever they were supposed to, the opposite of whatever they were supposed to be. And then they reported him, to the director of security, and then the person would be fired eventually. And I'm not sure what else they would, I'm not sure what else they did, but they did a lot. The director of security, he had some problems. He was in the Army, an officer, of course, in charge of the atomic cannons in Germany. And he was in charge of some other things, over time. But eventually he was in a car with other military men. I don't think they were on base. I never asked too many questions about it, but a drunken driver crashed into the car, and all the other military men that were in the car were killed. And Mr. Ross was severely injured. And, then of course he, had to get out of the military, on disability. But so when he'd be incapacitated or whatever, although there was a lieutenant, and I think the director of security was prejudiced against him because he was, of Mexican heritage or something. Although he was, he was a lieutenant. Shift supervisors were like sergeants. And the director of security would usually leave me in charge when he was in the hospital as a patient because of his leg from the accident. And when he went on went on things where he was out of town or vacation or whatever, he'd always sort of arranged to leave me in charge. And so I started picking up on the racism. And then there were some things when I was the day shift supervisor, and then I found out that, when I was a day shift supervisor, I was in charge of the day shift security officers, and I was in charge of, I forget how many, now, 10 parking lot attendants or something. And there was 3 parking lot attendants that worked on the second shift. And they never seemed to work out on the second shift. They were black, I think. I'm not sure that they were always black that were hired in, but they didn't stick, you know. So then one of the big things that I heard was, and they were laughing, you know, at the second shift, you know, bragged about it. Not to me, they knew better. But that they got one of the parking lot attendants on the second shift, they got him fired. They told the director of security that, I forget what, you know, something that he, you know, that they made up. And when he was informed, the second shift parking lot attendant was informed by these racist security officers that he was fired, and he was told to, you know, turn in whatever he had, I don't know, ID, whatever, and then left, you know, was leaving, going to his car. The two security officers, one a retired Kansas City, Missouri firefighter, and the other security officer, him and his wife, you know, had been invited out to my house. My wife made dinner and whatever. We had them out at the house. Both of them, not the security officer's wife, but both of the security officers, as this black parking lot attendant was fired and was heading to his car. The two security officers were yelling at him, you know, from across the street as he was going. Goodbye, little nigger, goodbye, little nigger, goodbye, little nigger. Then there were other, you know, I mean, when that happened, and then I ended up, the lieutenant had a heart attack because the director of security, the people at the hospital called the lieutenant, in security, they called him, Mr. Ross was the director of security. They called him, they called this security supervisor Mr. Ross's whipping boy. And that was like his name, and everybody, and the director of security in public did things to but anyway, when I heard about that, and then the lieutenant had a heart attack, so he was out for about 3 months because of his heart attack, and I was in charge. I was acting lieutenant or whatever for those 3 months. And when the director of security told me that that he was going to be going on vacation, the director of security was, and I said, okay, before you go, there's something that needs to be taken care of, and I'm going to take care of it. And then I said, we're going to call in now the supervisor of the second shift, and I'm going to inform him that there will be no more racism in this department, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the director of security says, okay. So I called him in, and I explained to him, of course and I said, don't lie to me. And I said, this is the way it's going to be. And I said, I'm putting an end to it, and I'm going to call in the entire second shift and speak to them as a group, and then I'm speaking to you right now, and I'm going to speak to each one of them individually. And this is the end of this. And so the next day, that was the last day for the director of security because he was going on vacation for 2 weeks or whatever. So the next day, the second shift supervisor comes in and goes to the office. The lieutenant had, the director of security had his own office. The lieutenant had an office that had a secretary in it. Really, well, it was really a director of security secretary, but his office, he didn't, it was just, but so anyway, I'm in the office because I'm acting, lieutenant now. And so this security officer, who's a supervisor of the second shift, comes in, and he said, "Jim, yesterday," because he was just coming into work, "yesterday, well, what you said to me," and I just, boom, I said, "This is, this is the way it is." And I said, I'm the director of security already had me. It wasn't just because he was going on vacation or whatever. Even human resources asked the director of security, "Sir, could you have Jim Howard do the interviewing for, and hiring of, because of the way Mr. Ross was so, out of touch with what you can do and what you can't do or whatever." But so anyway, the supervisor on the second shift comes in, "Jim, the way," and I said, "No, boom, I just, I said, "This is the way it's going to be." And I said, "As you know, we have an opening on the second shift for a security officer, and I will be hiring, and I'm going to hire the best qualified person that there is that I can get to come to work for us. And I'm not picking somebody out because they're black or anything else. I'm picking out the best person." And I said, "But if he happens to be black, he's going to be working on the second shift." And then, of course, this guy said, "Well, if he's not qualified." I said, "I just told you, I'll be hiring him. He will be qualified. If for any reason, if he wins the lottery and quits the job because he won the lottery, no matter what happens, if he leaves for any reason, you go." "Well, Jim," I just every time I just got, that's the way it is. Anyway, a black security officer showed up, or a black person showed up. He had a good experience. He'd worked for Crown Center Security, and he was also big, and had all the prerequisites that you'd like to have. And so hired him in. He actually outlasted me. I told that story a while back. But I hired him in, and there wasn't any racism going on that I know of while the director of security was gone. And when the director of security came back, now there was racism by the director of security, and he didn't even know he was, I don't think he even knew he was racist. And then after, when the lieutenant who had the heart attack and was off for like 3 months, the security officers on the second shift, they were calling him at home. The guy had had a heart attack. He had to have heart surgery done. They were calling him at home and playing into his fears that, that he was going to be replaced or he'd lose his job or something like that. And they were telling him lies, which were total lies. I didn't want the job. I didn't want any supervisor's job even. And they were telling him, "Oh, Jim Howard did this, Jim Howard did that. He's going to replace you," or whatever. And so then finally when the lieutenant came back, and he was afraid of losing his job. he'd have been afraid of losing his job no matter what job he had, because that's just, I've worked with a bunch of guys like that, you know, afraid to stand up for themselves. And one time, with the director of security, I was back in the director of security's office with him for some reason. You know, I just came in and did my job. No matter what my job was, I came in and did my job, and I did it. And the director of security, I had to do four grievances against him. And he went fucking crazy every time because he didn't think that, you know, and he was wrong on all of them. And I won all four of the grievances. And he was disciplined, you know, because of, you know, the grievance that I did, one of the grievances that I did against him. They were all basically against him because of things that but, so anyway, when Manuel, the second shift supervisor, comes back from his heart attack, the second shift then started up, they weren't afraid to, you know, they started up the racism. So the way it came to pass, I was in charge of, I went back to the day shift I was already day shift supervisor, I think. Yeah. Well, day shift and lieutenant. But when Manuel came back, then he was the second shift supervisor. And then they were like, oh, now, you know. So one of the second shift security officers comes in. Employees were not on the second shift and third shift, you know. They were not allowed to park in the parking garage. They had to park above level 4 to save room for people on the day shift and patients coming in and visitors and all that kind of stuff. And I really didn't care a lot of times where on the second shift or third shift, you know, people parked or whatever. Employees, you know, whatever. If it doesn't matter, it doesn't. If it's not, you know. But anyway, Chuck comes in to come to work, and he pulls in with he had I think a camper truck or whatever, and he parked it on the first level of the garage, and he parked it deliberately. The parking lot attendants, and I was in charge of the 7 parking lot attendants. He deliberately parked it because there was the exit gate, entrance gate and exit gate, you know. They had a gate, you know. And the parking lot attendants had a booth that was over a ways, but they could see the gates, and they could press the button to, raise or lower the gate, depending on what they had to do. So Chuck comes in and he parks his truck. Number one, he's parking on, you know. Why do that? I mean, I didn't care. Because parking wasn't a problem on the second shift, you know. It was a problem on the day shift. And I mean, it was a problem. I talked about this one time. The employee health nurse tried to run over me with her car. Funny. You know, I didn't report her or whatever. Of course, you know. Because parking was so, you know, had a department head that when he was in charge of food service, and when he pulled up, that parking lot that he pulled up to had X number of parking spaces, and we were required to keep, I forget how many, I think it was like 10 parking lot spots in there that were for the hospital volunteers, the old gray-haired ladies or whatever that came. And that was important to all the hospitals because those people actually, you know, they volunteered, but they they saved the hospital a lot of money. The hospital didn't have to pay them. Of course, I'm sure once a year they have a dinner for them. And I mean, you know, probably give them little gifts and stuff, all kinds of stuff going on. Anyway, we had to save those spaces. And so the parking lot attendant that was assigned to that, thing, he had to be aware how many parking spots, and when he got down, he had to, know, okay, now there's only 10 left, but there's still employees, and the employees will have to, go up and park in the other parking lot up there, which wasn't that, bad. But the employees, a bunch of them would say, I see parking spots right over there. And, well, we have to keep those for the hospital. But anyway, this dietary guy comes in, the head of dietary food service. That's a large department, and, he's a supervisor over, it was a, he comes in and they tell him, or the parking lot attendant says, well, sorry, but we have to keep those for the volunteers. There's space up in the other parking lot. And he just floorboards it, puts half of the tire, his, rubber coming off his tires and whatever. Anyway, okay, back to the garage. So the parking lot attendants, they had to be able to see, and Chuck parked deliberately in front. They said, Chuck, could you do me a favor? And, he could have said, the parking lot attendant could have said, you're not supposed to park on, but it's the evening shift, the security officers are going to think he's, So, so the parking lot attendant said, Chuck, could you do me a favor? Could you just move your truck over on this side? I can't see the thing. And I forget what he did now at this point. If he said fuck you or whatever, he gave him the finger or just ignored him, I was making my rounds and I come by and the parking lot attendant said, Jim, Chuck just parked his truck there. And he said, I asked him to please move it, and I forget what he said, and everything. So it was shift change time, So I took the radio and I called on the radio and I said, Chuck, could you come down to the parking garage? On the radio, He didn't answer. Of course, there was the day shift people getting ready to go home that were in the office turning in their stuff, and there was a second shift coming on, and there was a lot of radios there, and, no call from Chuck. So then I called up on the telephone, and I said, Chuck, come on down to the parking garage. You need to move your truck. So then he comes down. As he's coming down, I'm heading towards the hospital because I have to be going home here in a few minutes, And Chuck and I, we meet. And Chuck says, Jim, I don't know why you care more about those people than you do your own people. And I said, Chuck, I told you, I warned you in the past that I wasn't going to tolerate anything like this. And he says, there's nothing you can do. You're not the second shift supervisor anymore. And I said, we'll see, Chuck. Then I walked over to, there was other people around. I went over and there was a real nice Ralph King, I think it was, a hospital messenger who happened to be black. And I said, Ralph, can I talk to you for a second? He says, yeah. I said, did you hear the exchange that I had with Chuck? And he said, yes. And I said, what did you hear him say? And then he quoted, and, why do you care more about, those people than you do, And I said, okay, well, I'm going to write him up, and he's going to be fired. And the second shift, he'll be coming to you and saying, don't, he'll be contacting you, that kind of. I said, are you going to stand by what you just heard? And, he said, yes, Jim, I will. And he did. And they called him at home. The second shift did. Oh, you don't want to get him in trouble and all this kind of. So anyway, I went upstairs, and the lieutenant, I said, Chuck is going to be fired. And he said, well, you're not his supervisor. You can't. I said, he's going to be fired. He's going to be fired today. He's going to be fired right now. And I said, and you're the lieutenant. And he said, no, you can't fire him. You're not his supervisor. So then I went down to Human Resources. And by the way, the lieutenant told the secretary, "I'm leaving. Tell Jim I had to leave. Something came up." And she said, "What should I tell him?" Tell him I had a dentist appointment. I found out. So I went to Human Resources. I went in there and I said, got an employee in security, Chuck Moore, and he needs to be fired, and he needs to be fired right now. And she says, "Oh, there's nothing I can do. The director of security, she was the assistant director, or the assistant director of Human Resources." And she said, "Mr. Johnson's at a seminar in Florida, and it'll have to wait till he comes back." And I said, let me get this straight. Are you or are you not the assistant, director of Human Resources? "Yes, I am." And I said, "Then he's fired. Are you going to fire him now or not?" And she said, "Well, he'll have to wait till till Vernon Johnson gets back." And I said, "Never mind." And so then I went over and went to the administrative offices, and I went into the administrative offices to see the assistant administrator of the hospital. And I explained to him, what the situation was. And he picked up the telephone and called upstairs. Okay, no, the lieutenant hadn't left yet. He picks up the telephone, calls up to him, says, "Chuck Moore's fired." And so then I went up to the office, and got up there, and the secretary said, Manuel left. And he said to tell you that he had a dentist appointment, but he says he didn't have a dentist appointment. She said he makes me make all his dentist appointments and all his doctors. I keep track of all that. And he just, I said, okay. So when Chuck showed up, I called Chuck to the office, and I said, turn in your stuff. I forget what exactly, turn in your stuff. You're fired. And he said, you can't fire me. And I said, I just did. And he said, well, I want to talk to Mr. Ross, the director of security. And I said, he's on vacation. I forget what it was. He's on vacation or patient in the hospital. I forget what it was. And he said, well, Manuel. And I said, Manuel left. He's not here. Turn in your stuff. You're fired. So. And he was. And of course the second shift supervisor, he had to have a meeting. The guy was fired, but he had to have a meeting. So he came back, and I went to personnel, and the supervisor on the second shift went down there, and I forget who else. And that was it. The director of Human Resources, Mr. Vernon Johnson, a wonderful guy, really. He, he explained to him that he was fired, and that was it. I'm not going to tell you but I think it's a great. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. Remember, I told you that. Then I hired in a security officer for the second shift to fill the vacancy, or whatever, and then I told you that the other security officer or whatever said, well, he may not, he may not be good, but I said, oh, I said, if he goes for any reason, if he gets a job a couple blocks from where he lives at double the pay, if he wins a lottery, if he goes for any reason, you're going. And I said, you can trust me on that. Now, years later, I'm, where was I working? Okay, I was working for another hospital, and like I said, I had 4 kids. I was divorced. My wife and I were married for 12 years. And I had always claimed the kids, the understanding, I'm not sure it was in writing, but I had always claimed the kid, that was like when the divorce took place, okay, you get the house, you get the car, that was paid for and everything. And I claim the kids as dependents, fine. And that happened every year. Well, when the ex-wife moved in with her mother, with the kids and everything, I called then, when tax time came around, and I said, well, now that the kids and you are living with your mother, is your mother going to claim the kids as dependents? If she's going to claim them, then of course I won't claim them. And so she asked her mother, and no. Her mother said no. But I should have known. I should have known because of her mother and because of because her mother and her father owned a tavern. At that point, they didn't own the tavern, but they'd owned a tavern, and they had somebody who did their taxes and that type of stuff. So a couple years later, I get audited. I'm thinking, why in the world am I getting audited? I just, I never claimed, when I spent $600 for a weapon, I didn't take that off as a, deduction. When I bought new ammunition, because after a couple years, you need to make sure you have good ammo, stuff like that. When I was a welder, I didn't take off for the leathers and things that I had to buy and that type of thing. I just paid by taxes, unlike Donald Trump and other people, But anyway, I got audited, and turned out that my ex-mother-in-law had claimed the kids as dependents, and I owed $1,500 for 2 years. $3,000. The IRS says, "Okay, just make the check out, Mister." I said, "I don't have that kind of money." So I started working at another hospital on my nights off. So I was working 7 days a week. And I did that for a year in order to come up with $3,000 for paying back taxes. But anyway, when I was working at Menorah Hospital, I was working midnights because I worked midnights at my, full-time job, and I've been, but I'd come in, and the second shift supervisor was a female, and she was black, and I would come in, and well, of course, then look at me. Of course, I was younger, a little bit younger then, but look at me. Don't I look like a white racist? I'd come in, and she would occasionally make some type of a comment, which I just ignored. I can't think of what was said, but something would be said occasionally. She wouldn't say, "Oh, you're a racist" or whatever. But I'll try to think of something in which, let's say I came in which I wouldn't have done because I didn't fucking care. If I'd have come in and said, who am I working with tonight? The other security officer. She might have said, why? Is there a problem? Do you have some kind of a problem with who you're working with? Because probably black or something, I don't know. Something like that. It would be something like that. And I didn't care, I knew what I had done and how I had done the right things. And I would just ignore it. Didn't care. She was a nice person, actually, except for that. I mean, well, she was racist against white people. Probably had maybe some just cause to be, but I didn't care. But remember I told you that when I was working at Trinity many, many years ago, and I hired in a security officer to replace and told the second shift security officers, I'm going to hire in the best person I can, and he's going to make it. If he leaves for any reason, I wasn't talking about all the officers, but with the supervisors, when if he goes for any reason, you go. And of course, he came back the next day and said, Jim, you can. I explained, yeah, I can. If he leaves for any reason, you better make sure if you want to stay working. And he was retired from the fire department, and he wanted the job. But after I left Trinity, I want to say forgot about it, but I actually haven't forgotten about it because of these stories I'm telling you. But that was it. Moved on. So anyway, I come in at Manora for my midnight shift. Also, I really didn't care who I worked with. Whoever I worked with, I always gave 100%. I always tried to back everybody up. I didn't try to screw with anybody or do anything, like a lot of people, did or do or whatever, And remember, I hired that security officer. Not the last thing I did, but I hired him, So then he comes through the door. He was working second shift, and he was coming up to turn his keys in, and he comes in. Jim, what are you doing working here? I guess he didn't look at the schedule, or maybe there's a lot of hours, What are you doing working? So then that female supervisor, who was basically making little cracks, that I was racist or something, She said to him, you know Jim? And he says, yeah, I know Jim. I told you about him. I've told you about him repeatedly. I've told stories about him. Yeah, he's the guy that hired me in at, Trinity Lutheran Hospital and whatever. She never apologized to me or anything, but I hope that she learned her lesson. But I don't think she did. But at least maybe not, because the way things worked, the hospital that I was working for later on took over, I don't know, just about every hospital in Kansas City. They started out, when I went to work for them, one hospital. Then they built a smaller hospital out in the little town that I lived in, and I got hired in there. I had to file a grievance to do it, and I won. And then I was out there. And then they were taking over the corporation, Health Midwest. Were taking over other hospitals, and they took over just about all of them in Kansas City. And then, of course, Health Midwest, their thing was, we can't give you pay raises, we can't do this, we can't do that, because we've got to make sure that the for-profit hospital corporations don't come in and buy this. This would be bad for you, the employees, be bad for everybody. Of course, I told the other 24 security officers working there. I said, they're going to sell out to the corporation. I even named the corporation. They're going to, because it's a big one, you know. They're going to say, oh, no, they said they won't. I said, I don't care what they said. They're going to do it. I said, this, you know, Health Midwest, you know, corporation, built with the for-profit corporation, the one, you know, built on the on our property here. They, you know, they went together on that. So I said, that's the handwriting on the wall. These people here, you know, they're going to make a deal. Oh no! And of course, what happened? What I said would happen happened. But anyway, he'd been telling this security officer at Lenore Medical Center, I guess he'd been telling her stories about me standing up against me fighting against racism, and about me standing up to the director of, you know, security over, you know, racism and just everything else. I was a legend in my own time. Oh, yeah, so anyway, the Health Midwest takes over, you know, Lenore Medical Center and just about all the other hospitals. But then I was then working at Health Midwest, you know, Research Medical Center at the time, or Research. Yeah, I was working down at Research. I've been out of the hospital, or in the hometown, and then I eventually had to go to the main hospital. And then I was sent out a few times to Menora, because they built a new hospital, Menora Medical Center, built it, well, you know. And so I was sent out there a few times as the only security officer on duty, but it was just, I was sent out, there was somebody that the hospital had sent out to be 5 days a week, and occasionally I was sent out. And so when Menora Medical Center, a Jewish hospital, by the way, when they, you know, took it over, and then they, Health Midwest built a new one, you know, out there. And I was sent out, and then for a while, it was just us working before the Menora security officers came out. And so this female security officer on second shift that I told you about, that was just convinced, I guess, that I was a racist. I guess I looked like a racist. They were sent out there. The Menora ones were. And then I was sent out there just for a short period of time to be out there, so that the guy who was in charge from Health Midwest could go out and have a talk with them, because there was some problems with those security officers. And anyway, so I went out there, and I didn't need to work the entire shift or anything. I just went out there to stand by for an hour or two. The meeting didn't last that long, by the way. I think about 15 minutes. Anyway, I go out there, and she says, oh. I said, oh, they just sent me out here, you know, because I guess you guys are having a meeting. She says, yeah, I'm having, the guy's name happened to be Kent Howard, by the way, not related to me. He was vice president or something. They had more than one vice, but they had a bunch of vice presidents. The corporation did. Anyway, I said, oh, they just sent me out here to stand by while you, she says, I'm going to talk to this mister. I'm going to talk to Kent Howard. I'm going to tell him that I don't approve of this and this and this and, you know, whatever. And this is the way we used to do it at, you know, at the Menora. And I said, don't do that. She said, why? I said, just don't do it. I said, take my word for it, please. Don't. And So I forget what she told him. It wasn't anything, I mean, she didn't say it. She didn't cuss him out or anything or whatever. I guess she was assertive maybe. But Ken Howard came and, went on in for the meeting, and he came out like 10 minutes or 15 minutes later. And then she came out, and she said, I forget what she told him. Oh, she told him, I don't know who's responsible for saying that this is the way we do this and this is the way we do that. I don't know who that person is. And he says, I'm that person. So, and that's basically what I think I told her. I didn't know. That was basically, she says, yeah, you were right, Jim. So, oh, how long has this been? I did this before. If you happen to watch, when I did a crop like that, maybe I moved something. Nope, it won't show up. Oh, okay, there it did. I finally figured out what to do. Okay. Anyway. Oh. I was going to talk about this because of so I'm not now, not after almost an hour. I'll put the links below to these things. So the Oklahoma Sheriff's Department down there. Yeah, the things that, I'll just put the link so if you want to, you can read them. It's unbelievable. The sheriff and several other high officials they had a meeting with the public, I guess, and then then the public all left, and they, I guess, locked the door, and then they started talking. I don't think you'll believe, even if you think if you're in another country, and if you believe the worst of the United States, and if you believe, I don't think even you will believe what these people said. I'll put the links below to this, and as I find some others, I'll link them below, and you can watch them. Anyway, they didn't have a camera going, but they had audio going. And they were saying things like, they were using the N-word a lot, and they were saying, things like, the good old days when we could just lynch them, And then somebody probably said something like, well, the problem is now, where would we hide the bodies or whatever? And these other Oklahoma officers, or what, oh, I know some places where you can dump bodies. We can dump a couple bodies. I mean, they just went on and on like this. And I saw this thing yesterday. There's more news about it today. And in fact, I haven't actually read the thing, but people were calling for their resignations and all that kind of stuff, and apparently they've already, and I'm not sure if it's a state sheriff's department association, like a group or an agency or whatever, and the sheriff from each, or maybe the assistant sheriff too, they belong to that, and they probably have dinners occasionally, and I don't know, figure out how to lynch black people, I guess. I don't know. But they called for they kicked out, I mean, the shit is hitting the fan. Now, let me say this. You have to follow, you have to follow laws. And there has to be things, there has to be, search warrants, and there has to be, all things have to be done. You can't just, can't just do some things. But what what I would like to have seen it. Well, everybody came in. The governor of Oklahoma demanded, the resignation of the sheriff, demanded the resignation of somebody else, and shit is hitting the fan. But I mean, I think they're doing the, they're handling the thing. But when I saw this yesterday, heard it, or whatever, I thought, wow, man, they just ought to have of course, I knew you couldn't do it, Should have been a caravan, heading to that county. People in, officers, state highway patrol, whatever, with assault rifles and with, I mean, they just should have gone in there, and that should have been, okay, we're padlocking, this sheriff's department is closed down. The state highway patrol will be taking care of this, and everybody is suspended. I mean, but you can't do that. You got to go through the procedures. But that's what I wanted to. That's what I wanted to see. But that's what you can't. You have to go through procedures. You have to go through it has to be done. But I just hope they do every. I mean, the things. Well, the links will be below. Just wait till you hear. He was saying, these guys were saying, yeah, well, I know some people in the mafia, and we could just have them. They're talking about killing a newspaper, the local newspaper reporter who did think about how much risk, what a county of 10,000 or something, and you're doing a report on the sheriff's department, or just think, but. Anyway, I'll put the links below to this. If you don't see all the links below, it'll take me a little time to do it, so I'll be adding them. So if you look at it and you're interested and you watch some of them or listen to some of them or whatever you do, come back, there'll probably be some more. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe.